Your cooking is too home-style for the vision we have for this establishment. That's what Sophia told me after calling me into her glass-walled office on a foggy Wednesday morning. She'd owned Aspen Grove for barely a month and already had strong opinions about the food I'd been creating for 8 years. I'm Gene Park, 41 years old, executive chef at what used to be Aspen Grove Kitchen in Seattle, Washington. I'd elevated this place from a forgotten neighborhood spot into one of the most respected restaurants in the Pacific Northwest. Not with fancy foams or culinary spectacles, but with dishes that awaken something genuine in people's memories. We need a contemporary culinary direction, she continued, scrolling through her phone without making eye contact. Something more social media friendly, more fusion forward, more innovative. I didn't argue, simply nodded once and asked when my last day would be. She looked startled by that, by how easily I walked away, as if she expected me to protest or negotiate. But I won't plead with someone to appreciate what they clearly can't understand. 8 years I'd invested my soul into those dishes. 8 years refining recipes my grandmother taught me in Seoul when I was barely tall enough to see into the pot. 8 years crafting a menu that made diners close their eyes in appreciation with the first taste. Sophia smiled, obviously relieved. 2 weeks should suffice for the handover. You'll need to provide complete recipes for all signature dishes. Certainly. I nodded again, though we both knew I'd never documented a single recipe properly. Not the authentic ones, not the way I truly executed them. That evening during dinner service, I observed my kitchen team flow with the synchronicity of a symphony orchestra. Mia commanded the grill station with the timing of a metronome. Kai assembled plates with the finesse of a master calligrapher. They were still unaware. None of them realized that the essence was about to be stripped from this place. After closing, I lingered alone at the bar with a glass of single malt whiskey. The dining room was shrouded in darkness, save for the warm copper pendant light above my head. I ran my fingertips across the polished walnut bar, where I'd connected with countless guests who'd become dear friends. The next morning, Zach, my sous chef of 7 years, caught me wrapping my personal knives in their roll. "Chef, what's going on here?" I explained the meeting to him. His face transformed instantly, rage flickering behind his eyes. "This is absolute nonsense. The restaurant has never been more successful. It belongs to her now," I said, continuing to collect my things. "But these are your creations, your flavor profiles. People travel across the city for your cooking." I merely shrugged. "Not anymore." As I walked to my Subaru that evening, I looked back at the restaurant's glowing sign through the light drizzle. Something constricted in my chest. Not quite sorrowful. Something more acute. Something that murmured this story wasn't over. Not even close. My grandfather established the first Park's Kitchen in Busan when he was just 23. I grew up observing him work miracles with nothing more than rice, gochujang, and whatever vegetables appeared vibrant at the morning markets. Food wasn't elaborate in our household. It was honest. It was a heritage. It was the anchor that made people pause their rushing lives for a precious moment and remember their connection to something deeper. I didn't move to Seattle intending to become a chef. I was pursuing environmental engineering at the university, working nights washing dishes to fund my education. Then one evening, the line cook fell ill. The owner was desperate. I volunteered. Something resonated that night. The cadence of kitchen work felt more authentic than any engineering project ever had. 7 months later, I abandoned my degree. My father refused to speak to me for nearly 2 years. I worked my way through 6 different restaurants before joining Aspen Grove, when it was merely a struggling neighborhood eatery with dated interiors and an unmemorable menu. The owner, Walter, was about to surrender when he offered me complete autonomy over the kitchen. "Create food that resonates with your heritage," he said. "I'm completely out of inspiration." So I did. I crafted a menu centered around dishes from my grandmother's repertoire. Short ribs that braised for 6 hours with pear, garlic, and ginger. The slow-simmered oxtail soup with star anise and daikon that my grandfather prepared during harvest season. The rice cakes infused with honey and sesame marked every important family milestone. People responded, initially neighbors, then restaurant critics, then visitors who discovered us through online reviews. We weren't trendy. We were something that persisted longer, necessary. Walter sold the restaurant when his daughter needed specialized medical care overseas. I recognized the necessity. The new owners were an investment group who primarily allowed me creative freedom. Never disrupt what's succeeding, their managing partner promised. For 4 years, the arrangement worked perfectly. Then they sold it to Sophia. She started showing up during prep time, asking questions that exposed her complete lack of understanding about culinary operations and food culture. She'd bring influencer friends during rush service, rejecting meticulously prepared dishes because they weren't aesthetically composed enough for their digital platforms. 2 weeks before my termination, I accidentally overheard her phone conversation. "We'll preserve the name temporarily, but everything else transforms. Fresh concept, different chef, modern atmosphere." I should have braced myself then. Should have seen the writing on the wall. But something within me refused to believe anyone would tear apart something that connected so profoundly with our guests. Something people treasured. The night before my final shift, I prepared each signature dish one last time, tasting every component, imprinting the precise harmony of flavors into my consciousness. Though it was unnecessary, these recipes flowed through my blood. My last evening at Aspen Grove was restrained. I offered no farewell speech, declined any celebration, simply executed service as if it were an ordinary night, though each plate I sent from the kitchen seemed to carry the weight of finality. After closing, I deposited my keys on Sophia's desk, alongside a folder of recipes. The standard ones we kept for health department inspections and staff training. Not my authentic recipes. Not remotely. I returned to my modest hillside condo and uncorked a bottle of aged soju I'd been reserving for a special occasion. Sat on my terrace watching the city lights shimmer across Elliott Bay and experienced emptiness. No resentment, no grief. Just a void where 8 years of dedicated craft had once existed. By morning, my phone was overflowing with messages from the kitchen crew. Sophia had brought in a new executive chef, some guy named Daniel, who'd worked at a fashionable establishment in Los Angeles. He was already implementing his vision, they reported, reconfiguring the kitchen layout, discussing plans to modernize the menu. I didn't engage, simply muted my phone and took a long walk through the Japanese garden. For days passed before Zach appeared at my doorstep, still clad in his kitchen whites, eyes frantic. "It's an absolute train wreck," he declared, striding into my living room uninvited. "Daniel can't replicate a single dish properly. He's trying, but everything tastes fundamentally wrong." "They possess the recipes," I remarked. Zach shot me a pointed look. "They have what you documented, not your actual techniques or intuition." I shrugged and offered him a glass of barley tea. New leadership, new direction. That's the restaurant business. The loyal customers are definitely noticing. Dr. Chin sent back the short ribs 3 times last night. Said they weren't remotely close to how they should taste. Dr. Chun had dined with us every Tuesday for nearly 5 years. Always ordered the short ribs. Always mentioned how they reminded him of his grandmother's cooking in his childhood home in Taegu. "They're planning this massive relaunch event next week," Zach continued. "Critics, influencers, industry people, the whole production. Sophie is branding it Aspen Grove Evolution." Something awakened in my chest. Not vindication, exactly, but recognition. The stirring of an answer to a question I hadn't completely formed in my mind. "Are you currently job hunting?" I asked. Zach stared at me, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "My grandfather's former tea house in the International District. The property has been empty since his passing. I still hold the deed." "Are you thinking about starting your own restaurant?" I hadn't been. Not deliberately, but speaking it into existence suddenly illuminated everything. I'd dedicated 8 years to building someone else's dream. Maybe the moment had arrived to construct my own. "Possibly, if that interests you." Zach responded without hesitation. 100%. And I'm certain Mia and Kai would join in a heartbeat. That night, sleep eluded me completely. I excavated my grandfather's worn leather-bound journal, filled with partial recipe developments and observations about his favorite patrons. His calligraphy had grown more tremulous in his final years, but his culinary philosophy remained impeccably clear. On the first page, he'd inscribed, "The flavors endure in memory, even when the tongue forgets." I ran my fingertips over those characters and felt something kindle within, not resentment towards Sophia or even a craving for vindication. Something more elemental. The pure longing to create food with meaning again. Food that expressed my authentic voice. Within days of my exit, food influencers started uploading photos of Aspen Grove's new offerings. Images showcased deconstructed interpretations of my signature dishes, minuscule portions arranged in geometric patterns with unnecessary garnishes. Comment sections overflowed with bewildered regular customers. Where did the original menu go? This pretentious presentation isn't what made this restaurant worth visiting. I was sanding the original wooden counters in my grandfather's tea house when Sophia called. First communication since my departure. "Jean," she said, her voice artificially warm. "How have you been?" "Well enough. We're encountering some adjustment difficulties. I thought perhaps you might consider coming in as a consultant, just to facilitate a smoother transition." I set down my sandpaper. "What sort of difficulties?" She paused noticeably. "Certain signature dishes aren't coming together properly. Daniel is quite talented, of course, but our patrons are perceiving significant differences." "Didn't you receive the recipes?" I replied, echoing my response to Zach. "Yes, but there appear to be subtle elements missing." I nearly burst out laughing. Subtle elements like how I adjusted the marinade for the short ribs depending on the marbling of the meat. How the oxtail soup required completely different timing in summer versus winter. How the rice cakes needed precise temperature adjustments on particularly humid Seattle days. "I'm prepared to compensate you exceptionally well," she continued, "with formal recognition as consulting chef." "I'm currently committed elsewhere," I replied. "Listen, Jean," her tone sharpened considerably. "The relaunch happens in 4 days. We have major critics and financial backers attending. These signature dishes absolutely must be flawless. Perhaps you should have considered that before replacing the chef who developed them." A heavy silence followed. "I'll offer double your former salary for just 2 weeks of consultation." "Not interested." "Triple then." "This isn't about financial compensation, Sophia." "Then what exactly is it about?" "Injured ego?" "I made a strategic business choice, and now I'm proposing a mutually beneficial arrangement. I wish you success with your relaunch." I ended the call and returned to my restoration work. 90 minutes later, Zach called to inform me that Sophia was in the kitchen hovering over the cooks as they attempted my recipes, frantically documenting everything and grilling them about specific techniques. 2 days before the relaunch, I was at the farmer's market when Walter, the original owner, found me inspecting wild mushrooms. "Word about your situation has spread," he said, appearing beside me. "And I hear you're planning your own establishment." Information circulated with lightning speed in Seattle's culinary circles. "It's a possibility I'm exploring. Sophia contacted me yesterday. Wanted to know if I had any written records or observations about your cooking methods from your early days." Sounded quite desperate. I glanced up, intrigued. "How did you respond?" I told her that watching you cook was always like witnessing some form of alchemy. "I never fully comprehended your methodology." He picked up a chanterelle, turning it gently in his hand. "She's facing serious difficulties, you know. Those investors are anticipating the same caliber restaurant they've been reading glowing reviews about for years. The establishment you meticulously built." Later that afternoon, Mia, my former grill station chef, sent a text. "They're desperately trying to recreate your rice cakes. 8th attempt today. Still completely off the mark." I couldn't suppress a smile. Those rice cakes had required nearly 4 years of experimentation to perfect. The evening before the relaunch, Sophia appeared unannounced at my condo door. I was sufficiently surprised to let her in. "My final proposition," she stated, skipping any preliminaries. "Come back. Full creative autonomy, 25% ownership stake." I leaned against my kitchen island. "What's changed?" "The test run tonight was an unmitigated disaster. Our advance bookings for the next 6 weeks rely entirely on your culinary reputation." I made a significant miscalculation. For a brief moment, I weighed the offer. 25% represented substantial equity. But then my thoughts drifted to my grandfather's vacant tea house, to creating dishes according to my own vision and values. "I appreciate the generous offer," I replied, "but I've already begun something different." Her face instantly hardened. "If you're establishing a competing restaurant, you should be aware your employment contract includes a comprehensive non-compete clause. You're prohibited from opening within 5 miles of Aspen Grove for 3 years." I hadn't remembered that detail. Hadn't bothered to review the fine print. Interesting information, I said, holding the door open. Best wishes for tomorrow's event. After her departure, I immediately contacted my sister Jenna, who specialized in business contract law. The non-compete clause was indeed legitimate and potentially enforceable. My grandfather's tea house stood barely 2 miles from Aspen Grove. I'd stumbled into a complication I hadn't foreseen. That night, sleep was impossible. I evaluated my limited options: postpone opening, find a different location, legally contest the non-compete clause. None seemed satisfactory. At 2:45 a.m., I drove through the misty streets to my grandfather's building and sat quietly in the partially renovated space, contemplating the relaunch event at Aspen Grove scheduled for the following evening. Hanging hams, communal tables. Elena nodded. Different enough concepts that we could argue it doesn't compete directly. Risky, but plausible. I thanked her and departed, mind racing. I'd been so focused on recreating what I'd built at Cypress Mill that I hadn't considered returning to my roots, to the food that had started everything. On my way home, I received a text from Devin, who remained at Cypress Mill. Critics have arrived. Food's off. Trevor's panicking. I didn't respond. It wasn't my concern anymore. That evening, Raj, Maya, and Devin visited after their shift, expression somber. It was a disaster, Raj said, accepting the beer I offered. None of the signature dishes succeeded. The stew was bland, the lamb was tough, and the cake was dry as sandpaper. Bianca kept making excuses, blaming ingredients, suppliers, equipment, everything except the obvious. Which is, I asked. That they don't have you, Devin said plainly. We talked late into the night about what had transpired, how Trevor had attempted to follow my written recipes but missed all the unrecorded steps, how the critics had been noticeably disappointed, how Bianca had vanished into her office midway through service. There's more, Raj said, lowering his voice though we were alone. I overheard Bianca on the phone with someone, an investor, I think. Apparently, she leveraged everything to acquire Cypress Mill, expecting to flip it quickly for profit based on its reputation. Which was built on your food, I said. He nodded. She's in trouble. Without positive reviews from this relaunch, she might lose backing. I should have felt vindication. Instead, I experienced a strange clarity. This had never been about my cooking. It had been about money. About exploiting what I'd built for profit. I'm opening my grandfather's place, I announced. Returning to traditional Spanish tapas, his recipes, his approach. What about the non-compete? Maya asked. I explained Elena's reasoning. Different concept, different market. And honestly, if she wants to challenge me, let her try. Her restaurant faces bigger problems now. The following morning, the first reviews appeared online. They were as scathing as expected, a pale imitation of its former self. All presentation, no substance. The soul of Cypress Mill has disappeared. That afternoon, I signed a lease on a small storefront across from my grandfather's building. A space for a simple tapas bar, where I could cook while renovations continued on the main restaurant. I named it Silvera's Table. No concept, no gimmicks. Just food that mattered. On a hunch, I drove past Cypress Mill that night. The parking lot stood half empty. A handwritten notice on the door announced, "Limited menu tonight." The unraveling had begun. 3 weeks later, Silvera's Table was ready to open. Nothing elaborate. Just 10 tables, whitewashed walls, and my grandfather's old copper pans hanging in the open kitchen. I'd handwritten the menu. 6 tapas for main courses. 3 desserts. All his recipes, unchanged since he'd perfected them decades ago. I'd been meticulous about permits and licensing. Elena had reviewed all documentation to ensure we were protected if Bianca decided to cause trouble. But so far, she'd remained silent. According to Raj, who'd resigned from Cypress Mill along with Maya and Devin, she was too occupied trying to salvage her investment to worry about me. The night before opening, my mother called. We hadn't spoken much since I'd abandoned marine biology 16 years earlier. "Your sister told me about the new place," she said. Her voice sounded more fragile than I remembered. "Opening tomorrow. Using Abuelo's recipes. Everything exactly as he prepared them." A lengthy pause. He would be proud. More than he would have been of another marine biologist in the family. Something constricted in my chest. "You should visit sometime." "Perhaps I will," she said. I kept his old recipe journal, the authentic one with all his annotations. Your sister thought you might want it. I hadn't known it existed. I would appreciate that very much. 2 days after opening, with no marketing beyond an Instagram post by Maya, we had a line extending down the block. Word had circulated among Cypress Mill regulars that I was cooking again. We served 60 customers that night, with just the 4 of us working. Me and Raj in the kitchen, Maya and Devin handling the front. Every dish departed exactly as my grandfather would have prepared it. Unpretentious, flawless, genuine. A week later, Mr. Sullivan, the Wednesday seafood stew regular from Cypress Mill, found us. He embraced me with tears in his eyes. I've been searching everywhere for you, he said. Nothing's been right since you left. That night, I added my grandfather's seafood stew to the menu just for him. 2 weeks in, we were completely booked every evening. I'd hired 3 more kitchen staff and another server. My mother had sent the recipe journal, a worn leather volume filled with my grandfather's secrets. Things I'd never known about his techniques, about where he'd learned, about what each dish meant to him. It felt like he was there in the kitchen alongside me. On our 1-month anniversary, I arrived early to find a manila envelope taped to the door. Inside was a formal letter from Bianca's attorney alleging violation of the non-compete agreement and threatening legal action. I handed it to Elena over coffee that afternoon. Right on schedule, she said, scanning the document. I was wondering when this would materialize. Can they shut us down? She set down the letter. They can attempt, but I've been building our defense since we spoke. I have documented evidence that Silvera's Table is a traditional Spanish tapas restaurant based on your family recipes. Completely different from the new American cuisine at Cypress Mill. Different target audience, different price point, different concept. So we're secure? Better than secure. Their argument is extremely weak, especially now that Cypress Mill itself has completely transformed its menu. This was news to me. They have, Elena nodded, switched to molecular gastronomy last week. Foams, gels, the works, chasing the latest trend. They've essentially admitted through their actions that they're not the same restaurant you worked at. I smiled. Perfect timing. That evening, as I was prepping for service, a food critic from the Portland Press Herald entered. The same one who'd written a blistering review of Cypress Mill's relaunch. He didn't realize I recognized him. I simply cooked, dispatched food that would have made my grandfather proud. The next morning, his review appeared. The heart of Cypress Mill didn't vanish. It simply relocated across town and found its true home. By noon, our reservation list was full for the next 4 months. 6 months after opening Silvera's Table, I received a call from Richard, the original owner of Cypress Mill. Have you seen it? He asked without introduction. Seen what? Cypress Mill's for sale. Bianca's cutting her losses. I hadn't known, hadn't really considered Cypress Mill in months. I'd been too occupied running my own establishment, expanding the menu, and training staff. Asking price is half what she paid, Richard continued. She's desperate for a quick exit. Not my concern, I said, though something stirred in me. Not quite satisfaction, but a sense of things coming full circle. That afternoon, Elena called. Bianca's dropped the lawsuit. Seems she has more pressing issues, like selling a failing restaurant. Indeed. Want to know the best part? Her investors are suing her for misrepresentation, claiming she sold them on the reputation of a restaurant that no longer exists. I reflected on that as I prepared for dinner service, about the shortcuts Bianca had attempted, about how she'd observed only the surface of what made Cypress Mill special, never comprehending the foundation it was built upon. 3 days later, a sleek Audi parked outside Silvera's during lunch service. Bianca emerged, adjusted her blazer, and entered. The dining room fell quiet as regulars recognized her. I watched from the kitchen pass as she surveyed the packed restaurant, taking in the simple decor, the contented diners, the staff moving with practiced coordination. Then she noticed me. Our eyes connected across the room. I expected hostility, resentment. Instead, I saw something resembling acceptance, perhaps even respect. She offered a slight nod, turned, and departed. I never encountered her again. The following week, Cypress Mill closed permanently. The building remained vacant for months, a silent testament to ambition without understanding. I didn't celebrate. Didn't need to. The food had spoken for itself. 1 year after opening Silvera's Table, We expanded into my grandfather's original building next door. The renovation was complete. His old copper pans still hung in the new, spacious kitchen. We maintained the tapas bar as a lunch venue and launched the main restaurant for dinner service. On opening night, I stood in the kitchen doorway observing the dining room fill. Families, couples, regulars who'd followed me from Cypress Mill, new faces drawn by reputation. Raj nudged my shoulder. "Are you going to stand there all evening, or are we cooking?" I smiled and returned to the line. Midway through service, Maya appeared in the kitchen. "Someone's here to see you." At a corner table sat my mother. She rose when she saw me, extending her hand formally. I ignored it and embraced her instead. "The place looks wonderful," she said, glancing around. "Just as your grandfather had it. With a few modernizations, I admit it. But the essence remains unchanged." We conversed throughout her meal. The first meaningful dialogue we'd shared in years, about my grandfather, about food, about what it meant to build something enduring. As she was leaving, she pressed something into my palm. "A key to the small vineyard in Galicia," she explained. "Your grandfather left it to me, but it should belong to you. Perhaps someday you'll craft wine as extraordinary as your food." That night, after everyone had departed, I sat alone at the bar with a glass of my grandfather's favorite sherry. The dining room lay in darkness except for the soft light above me. On the wall hung a framed copy of that Portland Press Herald Review. The heart of Cypress Mill didn't vanish. It simply relocated across town and found its true home. I'd never set out to destroy what Bianca built. I'd only wanted to create something authentic, something genuine. In the end, that had been sufficient. Sometimes the most effective revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply doing what you were born to do and doing it exceptionally well. I raised my glass to my grandfather's memory and to the empty chairs that would fill again tomorrow. This place wasn't just a restaurant. It was home.